Hello world, I'm Amy Kay. This is my take. I'm bringing this channel back because I'm fired up about Michigan and what Michigan legislatures and the Democrats are doing to homeschooling families, what they're trying to do. So I'm going to break some of this down. I'm probably going to make a bunch of videos about this because I have a lot of things I want to say, but I want to keep them short for you. So I live in Michigan. Michigan is one of the best states for homeschooling. And yes, I homeschool my children. And the reason it's one of the best states is because there's no rules, there's no law, there's no red tape, there's no strings or hoops to jump through. It's a fantastic state for homeschooling so far. But the governor and the Democrats in Michigan are wanting to propose a law that will, at the minimum, they say. See, you can't really actually read this bill yet from what I understand. It's just they're probably cooking it up right now. It's probably already been cooked up. But the quotes I'm reading are, they say, at the minimum, they want to require homeschool families to register their children, probably with the local school district. But again, I don't know those details yet. And it doesn't matter register with who. We shouldn't have to register with anyone at all, ever. I have a feeling that they will also add a whole bunch of other rules and regulations to this bill. And so the point of me talking about this is to get you fired up like I'm fired up. Now is not the time to be quiet, because this thing could very well pass, and they're doing it very quickly, and they're doing it very sneakily. This whole thing was announced at a time when because what do you do, right? This is what we all know. When there's a bill coming up that you don't like, what are we supposed to do? You're supposed to call your legislator. And if you don't know who that is, even, you can look it up. It's not hard to find. It's not hard to make a phone call either. But they announced this over this Christmas time when the legislators are home on break. So apparently their offices are closed and you can't even call them. So that's no coincidence. But when they come back in January, I think they're going to try to the Democrats at least, will try to push this very, very, very quickly. And so there's no time to waste on speaking up, getting your ducks in a row, finding out who your legislator is, put it in your calendar. I know how it is, we're busy, but this is important. It's also a time to join the HSLDA and the Michigan Information for Christian Homeschoolers Network. I'll put links below. So I'm a member of both of those now because they are on the front lines fighting this. But you know what? This is 2023 and we have this, and you have social media, and you have friends, and you have contacts. And this is something that not just a lot of us homeschool because of our well, actually for a lot of reasons, but this is not just for Christians, because there's a lot of people now who homeschool who are not Christian. And to speak to you folks, you don't want regulations either. They make it seem so harmless and so good for your children. And we're going to talk about all of that. It's not harmless. And it's not necessarily good for your children. And it can actually cause you a whole bunch of hassle that is unnecessary. So go start learning about this. I'm not going to spoon feed you everything, because what I'm going to talk about here is my take on it all. And I'm really frustrated with these Democrats in Michigan right now. And I've been frustrated with them for a while. And I'm usually not very political, whatever. I have other fish to fry in my life. But this one affects me, and it will affect my children's ability to homeschool freely. So this video, I'm going to talk about the fact that there's mandatory reporters everywhere already. So here's what they're trying to say that this is, because they're trying to say that they think homeschooling families should register their children to prevent child abuse. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit. And I have something to tell you about this whole thing at the end of the video, so stick around. They're citing some cases of, now I will tell you this, child abuse is a sin and it should absolutely be punished. And we're going to talk about that. But and there are probably homeschool families who abuse children, but this is not the solution. Making all homeschool families register or have other regulations and requirements or whatever it is that they want to do is not going to prevent child abuse. It's not going to do it. This is not how you do it. It won't work. It will not work. So just because I'm defending homeschooling freedom does not mean that I condone child abuse. Quite the opposite. I'm pretty disgusted by it. So, but that's what they're going behind because, it's touchy-feely and it tugs at heartstrings. Who doesn't love the children? Yeah, we all love the children. Why I homeschool mine. But that's what they're going at. So they're saying, I think what they're going to propose to attach to this law is that you have to register and then they know who you are. And then the regulation is that, and this is, I think, what they proposed in 2015, and it did not go through because back in 2015, we had a more Republican majority in Michigan in the legislative bodies. But what I think they attached to it then was that the homeschool families would have to have someone, a mandatory reporter type of person, talk to their children twice a year. Not exactly CPS, but someone who's trained in recognizing child abuse, who can talk to the kids twice a year and see if there might be child abuse, see if they suspect it, and then report it to CPS. So I have a feeling because of the lingo now that that's going to be attached. Right now, they're just talking about registering. We're just probably going to make you register minimum, in parentheses, minimum. I think what they're going to add on is that we have to somehow have our kids talk to someone. And I'm totally against that. And the idea is that then those people will recognize signs of child abuse or neglect or whatever it is by talking to our kids twice a month or twice a year. And I think in 2015, they were proposing that it be a doctor or a psychologist. Those folks don't even have time. Can you imagine how many more appointments that would be? Have you seen the healthcare system lately since COVID? They are booked way advanced. They don't have time to make appointments for thousands and thousands of children when it's a state-run program. And then those practitioners have to jump through state-run hoops. I mean, what a nightmare. It's just going to be a nightmare. This will never work. And it won't help prevent child abuse. It will not prevent it. So the question then, there's so many questions. One question is, do my kids, for example, need, and you can see why this is not just an issue for the Christian homeschoolers. It's an issue for all homeschoolers, whatever your reason is for homeschooling. The question then is, do my kids need to have the state arrange for a mandatory reporter to talk to my kids? Or is there other ways, if I were an abuser, and I am not, but if an abuser out there was abusing their kids, are there other opportunities for mandatory reporters to notice, have a suspicion when they see something worth suspecting child abuse, and them to report CPS? And the answer is yes. There are mandatory reporters everywhere in our society, including our homeschool circles. And they're talking about, well, homeschool kids are isolated. No, they're not. You are ill-informed and ignorant about homeschooling. So I made some notes about mandatory reporters. And if you don't know, a mandatory reporter is usually someone who holds a state license, and I'll tell you, I'm a registered nurse. And so part of an oath, in a sense, that I took when I took a license from the state that allows me to practice as a nurse was that I would be a mandatory reporter. And that means if I suspect child abuse or neglect or these other kinds of things, then I have to call CPS and file a report. That's all it means. But I've always taken that pretty seriously. I will tell you, I've had my nursing license for 20 years. I've never noticed or suspected abuse ever. I've never filed a report. But I just want you to know how it works. And mandatory reporters are not, nor should they investigate. The idea is not that a mandatory reporter is positive. Sometimes mandatory reporters don't even know who the abuser is. But for example, I'm just going to give you an example. A mandatory reporter might notice bruises in a weird place, maybe on the back of the neck. okay? Or maybe the arms right here. And if a mandatory reporter sees unusual bruising, scratches, things like that, that's suspicious of child abuse, because that's not a normal place for a child to have bruises. Bruises on the knee, you know, I see lots of kids with bruises on the knee. That's a normal place for a child to have a bruise. I don't call CPS when I see bruises on the knee and the elbows and things like that. So mandatory reporters get a little bit of training about this stuff, but their job is not to investigate. That's CPS's job, and then we know how that works. But you might not be familiar with mandatory reporters, but now you know registered nurses are mandatory reporters. So I tell you what, all the homeschool kids that we hang out with have a mandatory reporter in their midst. Here's some other mandatory reporters. Members of the clergy are mandatory reporters, and they know that. It's not like people who are mandatory reporters know that. And I tell you what, Governor Whitmer and all you Democrats, if you're listening, this is what I want you guys to pay attention to. There are mandatory reporters everywhere, and you all know a lot of homeschooling families are homeschooling. Partly a majority of our reason is to give our kids a biblical foundation as we grow them up. And so we hang out with clergy. And so clergy are mandatory reporters. There are mandatory reporters all over where homeschoolers go. So nurses, members of the clergy, dentists, everyone who works in the dentist's office, mandatory reporter. Doctors, we go to doctors when we need doctors. They're mandatory reporters. Physician's assistant, nurses, anybody at friend of the court, anyone who's gone through a divorce and has child custody, anyone at the friend of the court is mandatory reporters. Physical therapists and physical therapy assistants, probably nursing assistants too. EMTs, paramedics, probably firefighters, police officers, obviously. Any kind of licensed therapist, counselor, psychologist are all mandatory reporters. Childcare providers are mandatory reporters. Occupational therapists are mandatory reporters, and speech therapists are mandatory reporters. These are just some of the people that hang out in our homeschool communities. They're at our churches, they're at our fellowships, they're at our homeschool gatherings, and we just go to these people. Like, we go to the doctor when we need a doctor. You know, my kids went to the dentist yesterday. It's not like we don't hang out with mandatory reporters, and that you need, Democrats, been talking to the Democrats, you don't need to make appointments for my children to talk to a mandatory reporter privately. We already hang out with them, and they know my kids better than a 2-year appointment ever could. What nonsense. There are altogether, and you can go Google this, go Google it. I'm not going to spoon feed you. I don't have time to spoon feed you. I'm not rude. I just don't have time. And if you ask questions, I might answer them. I might not. Also, I delete rude comments. If you're rude to me or someone else, I just delete it. I just don't have time. I don't have time to babysit comments. I just don't. If you go and Google it, you'll see there are over 30 kinds of mandatory reporters in Michigan. I just read you a few of them, including one I did mention, teachers. Teachers. There are a lot of teachers where I hang out with my homeschool groups, which also should make you think. So we go to stuff. We're not as isolated as you think you are. And if someone really wanted to abuse their kids, they're just not going to register. And they're going to hide it really well. So that's just not going to fix the problem. We'll talk more about that in future videos. Here's the last thing you all need to know. All of you, the Democrats and those of you watching this video, just in case you don't know, but I think everyone should know this. I'm just going to state the obvious here. We're all mandatory reporters. Any adult with a conscience, and any believer especially, if you believe the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you obey the Bible, you already are a mandatory reporter. You don't need a license from the state or a piece of paper from the state telling you that the right thing to do is to report suspected child abuse. The Bible has a ton to say about protecting the weak and the oppressed, and children are weak because they're children, they're minors, they don't have a voice, they're under the control of someone else. My children are under my control. I tell them where to go, I can tell them what to eat. Like, I'm their mom, they're under my authority. That puts them in a weak position. All children are in a weak position just because they're children. That's how God designed it. And that's good because they're not fully developed yet. They need authority to guide them through life. But especially fellow believers, if you ever suspect child abuse, you need to do something about it. And that's a whole nother discussion. What do you do? But sweeping it under the rug and staying quiet is never, never the right thing to do. We are all already mandatory reporters. And so, Governor Whitmer and all you Democrats, you're trying to tell homeschoolers, who are mostly Christian believers, that we need one of your approved people to somehow analyze for child abuse. These kids are hanging out in probably the safest place of all of society. They're hanging out with Christians. And they're hanging out with homeschool families, parents who probably are hardcore believers, because, there's all kinds of believers out there. But homeschool families tend to be really hardcore. So do a lot of public school families are hardcore believers too. That's not like just a homeschool thing. But these kids are already in a really safe environment with people who love them and people who will stand up for them as the scriptures tell us to. You don't need to make appointments for us. We're already okay. This stuff is not rocket science. It's pretty obvious, I think. And here's what I'm going to close with. I told you I would tell you the thing at the end. Because this is obvious, it's not like, I think it's obvious that the Democrats don't see it, I guess. But I don't think Democrats and Governor Whitmer are stupid. I think they're really bright, actually, which is how they got to where they are. So you have to ask yourself, fellow homeschooling parent, what is this really about? They're saying it's about, oh, we want to protect the children. We love the children. Don't you love your children? Don't you love other people's children? Don't you want to protect them? That's not what this is about. And I'm going to give you a whole bunch more points in future videos of how nonsensical this is. They know it's nonsense. They know that this isn't the real reason they want this control over us. It's not the reason. So I'll talk about some of their talking points but I'm going to remind us frequently that's not the real reason they're doing this. Start asking yourself, what's the real reason they're trying to regulate homeschooling? Could it be elections? Could it be that they hate Christians? Could it be that we don't teach our children certain things the way they want them taught? I teach my kids about the world. I teach my kids all about the world because I want them to hear it from me and from a Bible-centered worldview. I don't want them to learn about it from someone else teaching them this is okay and this is okay. No, I'm going to teach them right and wrong from my perspective because I'm the mom. And their dad teaches them that too. So ask yourselves, what is it really about? And don't fall for the smoke and mirrors. Oh, it's about preventing child abuse. That's nonsense. There's mandatory reporters everywhere. I'll see you in the next video.